It's a funny thing about the scent of rain on dry earth, isn't it? They call it petrichor, a beautiful word for a simple thing. For 67 years, that smell has meant comfort to me. It meant the flowers in my little Ohio garden would get a drink. It meant a cozy afternoon indoors with a book and a cup of tea. It was the scent of life, of renewal. But now, when I smell something burning, even just a piece of toast, my mind doesn't go to petrichor. It goes to the scent of gasoline and the terrible, hollow silence that came right before my world was meant to turn to ash. It was the day my son, my only child, tried to burn me alive, all for a house and a handful of forgotten promises. My name is Eleanor, and this is the story of how the boy I taught to walk, the boy whose scraped knees I bandaged and whose nightmares I chased away, became the man who locked my door and whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." It all began, as so many of life's unravelings do, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A quiet change in the air. My son, Thomas, had always been the sun in my sky, especially after his father, Arthur, passed away. Arthur was the steady oak of our family, and when we lost him to a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, Thomas, then just 25, became my anchor. He'd call every day. He'd drive the 2 hours from the city just to mow my lawn or fix a leaky faucet, his laughter filling the empty spaces Arthur had left behind. We were a team, a small, resilient unit of two against the quiet loneliness of the world. I lived in the house Arthur and I had built with our own hands, board by board, dream by dream. Every floorboard held a memory. The faint scratch near the hearth was from when Thomas, aged 4, tried to drag the Christmas tree in all by himself. The sunny spot in the kitchen was where I'd sit for hours, shelling peas from the garden, listening to the radio. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was the story of my life, the container of my love. And Thomas, I thought, understood that. He loved this house, or so I believed. He spoke of raising his own children here one day, under the same roof that had sheltered him. Then, Miranda came into his life. On the surface, she was everything a mother might hope for. She was polished, articulate, with a smile that was bright, perhaps a little too bright, like a light bulb you know is about to burn out. The first time Thomas brought her home for dinner, I baked my famous apple pie, the one with the lattice crust he adored. Miranda picked at it. "So much sugar, Eleanor," she'd said with a little laugh, patting her slender waist. "I do have to be careful." I noticed the small things first. Thomas stopped calling every day. It became every few days, then once a week. When he did call, his voice was different, distant. He used to tell me everything, troubles at his accounting firm, a funny thing he saw on the street. Now, our conversations were stilted, filled with awkward silences that I would rush to fill with chatter about my garden or the neighbor's new puppy. He'd answer in monosyllables, and I could often hear Miranda's voice in the background, a low, controlling murmur. The visits dwindled, too. When they did come, it felt less like a homecoming and more like an inspection. Miranda would walk through my house, her eyes scanning everything with a critical gaze. "These old drapes are a bit dreary, don't you think?" she'd comment, fingering the floral fabric Arthur and I had chosen together. "And this wallpaper, so dated." Thomas would just nod, avoiding my eyes, a stranger in the home where he'd taken his first steps. The ache in my chest was a constant companion, a dull, heavy stone of grief for a loss I couldn't quite name. I was losing my son, one piece at a time, to a woman who saw his past, our past, as something to be discarded and updated, like old furniture. I tried to talk to him once, gently. We were in the garden, just the two of us for a rare moment. I was pruning my rose bushes, the ones Arthur had planted for our 10th anniversary. "Tommy," I began, using his childhood name. "Is everything all right? You seem far away." He stiffened, pulling a weed with unnecessary force. "Everything's fine, Mom. I'm just busy. I have a life, you know. A serious relationship." The implication stung. That his life with me wasn't serious. That it was something to be outgrown. "Of course you do, darling," I said, my voice softer than I felt. "I'm so happy for you. It's just, I miss you." He didn't look at me. He just stared at the dirt on his hands. Miranda thinks we should be looking to the future, not dwelling in the past. And there it was. Miranda thinks. It was no longer what Thomas thought. It was what Miranda dictated. The future, I would soon learn, had no room for me in it. It was a future built on the foundations of my home, a home she wanted, but without its primary resident. The first mention of selling the house was disguised as concern. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. Miranda had been pointing out hairline cracks in the ceiling and talking about the cost of rewiring an old house. Eleanor, she'd said, placing her manicured hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. Thomas and I have been talking. We're worried about you, all alone in this big place. The upkeep must be a nightmare. Thomas, sitting opposite, just stared into his coffee cup. It's a lot of work, Mom, he mumbled. And it's a big asset just sitting here. The market is incredible right now. Asset. He called our home an asset. It felt like he'd called my heart a pump, a simple muscle. But this is our home, Tommy, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Your father built this place. It's everything. Dad's gone, Mom, he said, and the cruelty in his tone was so sharp it took my breath away. We have to be practical. You could get a lovely little condo. No stairs, no yard work. We could invest the rest of the money for you. Miranda is very good with finances. Miranda smiled her bright, predatory smile. We'd make sure you were comfortable for the rest of your life, Eleanor. It's the smart thing to do. I felt the walls of my own home closing in on me. They weren't asking, they were telling. This was the plan. My comfort wasn't the goal, my compliance was. I looked at my son, searching his face for the boy I knew, the one who cried when his pet hamster died, the one who held my hand at his father's funeral and promised he'd always take care of me. I couldn't find him. In his place was a man with cold eyes and a ledger in his soul, tallying up the value of my memories. No, I said, the word tasting like rust in my mouth. I'm not selling. This is my home. And I'm not leaving until the day I die. The silence that followed was terrifying. Miranda's smile vanished. Thomas's jaw clenched. It was the first time I had truly defied them, and I felt a line being drawn in the sand. I had no idea that on the other side of that line wasn't just a condominium, but a small, dark shed and the smell of gasoline. My declaration to stay in my home until I died was a vow I had made to myself and to the memory of my husband. I never imagined my son would take it as a challenge, a problem to be solved in the most horrific way. The weeks that followed my refusal were a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by Miranda with Thomas as her willing, or perhaps unwilling, soldier. The phone calls stopped completely. My texts went unanswered. When I called his office, the secretary would politely inform me that he was in a meeting. He was always in a meeting. I was being erased, systematically cut out of his life like a troublesome paragraph from a story he was rewriting. The loneliness was a physical presence. It sat with me at the dinner table, a silent, mocking guest in Arthur's empty chair. It walked with me through the garden, where the roses seemed to droop with a shared sadness. I'd find myself talking to Arthur, whispering into the quiet rooms. What would you do, my love? How do we raise a son who could be so cold? The silence was always my only reply. Then, the campaign escalated. A letter arrived from a lawyer, a formal inquiry, about the ownership of the house. It was phrased in dense, legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were investigating ways to force a sale. My name was on the deed, alongside Arthur's. It was my house, legally and morally. But the letter was a threat, a shot across the bow. It was designed to frighten me, to make me feel powerless. And it worked. My hands shook for hours after I read it. I called my sister Mary, who lived 3 states away. Her voice, full of righteous anger, was a balm. That horrible woman has him bewitched, Eleanor. You need to get a lawyer of your own. You need to fight this. But how could I fight my own son? How do you take up arms against the person you love most in the world? Every maternal instinct screamed at me to fix it, to find the right words to bring my boy back. So, instead of a lawyer, I wrote him a letter. I didn't mention Miranda or the house. I just wrote about him. I wrote about the day he was born, how the doctor placed him in my arms, and I felt my world click into place. I wrote about teaching him to ride his bicycle, my hand on the back of the seat, running behind him, letting go, and watching him fly for the first time, my heart soaring with his. I filled 7 pages with love, with memories, with a desperate plea to the son I knew was still buried somewhere inside that cold stranger. I ended it with, "I love you more than my own life, Tommy. Please, just talk to me." I put it in an envelope with a photo of him and Arthur, both of them beaming, on a fishing trip when he was 10. I received no reply. The turning point, the moment the path to that terrible day was irrevocably set, came about a month later. It was a Saturday. I was in the back garden, weeding the vegetable patch, my hands deep in the cool soil. It was the one place I still felt a sense of peace. I heard a car pull up the driveway and my heart leaped with a foolish, desperate hope. Maybe it was him. Maybe he got my letter. It was. Thomas and Miranda stepped out of the car. But they weren't coming to the front door. They were walking around the side of the house, their faces set and determined. Thomas was carrying a large, empty cardboard box. "What's going on?" I asked, standing up and wiping my hands on my apron. Miranda didn't even look at me. She addressed Thomas. "Let's just get this over with." Thomas finally met my gaze, and his eyes were empty. "We're clearing out the attic and the shed, Mom. There's a lot of old junk up there. It's a fire hazard." A fire hazard. The words hung in the air. Junk. I stammered. "Tommy, those are your father's things. Your old school projects. Our memories." "It's clutter, Mom," he said flatly. "We're decluttering." I watched in a state of numb horror as they went into the house and up the stairs. I could hear them overhead, the sound of things being dragged across the floor, the careless, heavy thuds of my life being sorted and discarded. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I ran inside and up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. The attic door was open. They were surrounded by the ghosts of our family. Arthur's old woodworking tools, boxes of my wedding china, a trunk filled with baby clothes I had saved. Thomas was holding his old rocking horse, the one Arthur had carved for his 3rd birthday. For a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a memory, a pang of regret. But then Miranda spoke. "Just put it in the box, Tom. It's just old wood." He tossed it carelessly into the box. It landed with a hollow crack. That sound broke me. "Get out," I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. They both turned to look at me. "What did you say?" Miranda asked, her voice sharp. "Get out of my house." I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat. "These are not your things to touch. This is not junk. This is my life. My husband's memory. Get out." Thomas looked shocked, then angry. It was the first time he'd seen me as anything other than a gentle, yielding mother. "You see," Miranda said to him, her voice dripping with vindication. "She's irrational. She can't manage on her own." Thomas grabbed my arm. His grip was hard, unforgiving. "Calm down, Mom. You're being hysterical." "Don't you touch me," I said, pulling my arm away. "Just go." They went. But not before Thomas, his face a mask of cold fury, said something I will never forget. "You're so attached to this past, Mom. Maybe you should just stay with it." They left, taking nothing with them that day. The silence they left behind was heavier, more final than ever before. I sank to the floor of the attic, surrounded by the clutter of my love, and I wept until I had no tears left. I wept for my husband, for my son, and for the woman I used to be, the one who believed that a mother's love was a shield that could protect her child from the world, and the world from her child. I didn't realize his words were not just a cruel jab, but a prophecy. A plan was forming in his mind, a final, terrible way to make me stay with the past forever. The day it happened began with an unnatural quiet. The birds weren't singing. A heavy, gray sky pressed down on the world, promising a rain that never came. I woke up with a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the fight in the attic. There had been no word from Thomas. The silence had become a living entity in the house, a constant reminder of my isolation. Around noon, his car pulled into the driveway. My heart did a foolish, hopeful flip before the dread returned, heavier than before. He was alone. No Miranda. For a wild moment, I thought, he's come to apologize. He's come back to me. He walked to the front door and knocked, which was strange. He always just used his key. When I opened it, his face was unreadable, a blank canvas. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. Too quiet. "Thomas," I said, my own voice a hopeful whisper. "Come in." He stepped inside, but didn't move towards the living room. He stayed in the entryway, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I need to get the old lawnmower out of the shed. Mine's broken down." It was such a normal, mundane request that it disarmed me. "Oh, of course, darling. The key is on the hook by the back door." "Right," he said, but he didn't move. He just looked at me. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or coldness. It was an absence. A terrifying emptiness. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "There's something in the shed I want to show you. Something of Dad's I found." The mention of his father was the bait, and I took it without a second thought. Hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. "What is it?" I asked, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in weeks. "It's better if I just show you," he said, gesturing for me to lead the way through the kitchen to the back door. We walked out into the oppressive gray air. The shed stood at the far end of the garden, a small wooden structure where Arthur had kept his tools, and I kept my gardening supplies. It was also where I stored the most precious things, the things I couldn't bear to keep in the attic. A large, sealed trunk containing all of Arthur's letters to me from when he was away on business, my own wedding dress, and a sturdy box I called the Thomas box. It held everything from his first pair of shoes to his high school diploma. I walked ahead of him, my heart feeling lighter than it had in so long. He was talking about his father. He was connecting with our past. Maybe the letter had worked after all. Maybe he was finally coming home. I reached the shed. The door was slightly ajar. "It's in here," I asked, turning to him. He nodded, his face pale. "In the back corner." I stepped inside. The air was musty, filled with the familiar smells of potting soil, old wood, and oil. It was dark, with only a little light coming through the one small, grimy window. I took a few steps in, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. "Where, Tommy?" "I don't see." That's when I heard the sound. The sound of the heavy wooden door swinging shut behind me. The sound of the large iron bolt, the one Arthur had installed for security, sliding firmly into place. Click. The finality of that sound echoed in the small space. I stood frozen for a second, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. "Tommy?" I called out, my voice small. "Thomas, what are you doing?" "This isn't funny." Silence. I turned and pushed against the door. It was solid, unmoving. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. "Thomas, open the door." I yelled, my voice rising. I banged on the wood with my fists. "Let me out." And then I heard his voice, muffled, from the other side. It was a voice I didn't recognize, a dead, emotionless monotone. "Goodbye, Mom." Those 2 words shattered me. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a sentence. A verdict. I stopped banging on the door, my hands dropping to my sides. My mind was reeling. "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Mom." The words circled in my head, meaningless and yet holding all the meaning in the world. Then came the smell. Faint at first, then stronger. Sharp, chemical. Gasoline. I could hear a sloshing sound, the liquid being poured against the base of the wooden shed. Poured all around it. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, away from the door, my legs giving out from under me. I fell to the dusty floor, my back against the far wall. A fire hazard. That's what he had called the things in the attic. He was eliminating the fire hazard. He was eliminating me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even cry. A profound, bone-deep shock had taken over. I was going to die here, in this dark little shed, surrounded by the relics of the love I had poured my life into. My son, my baby boy, was going to burn me alive. My eyes darted around the small, dark space, looking for an escape that didn't exist. The one small window was high up, and the glass was thick and old. There was no way to break it. I was trapped. The smell of gasoline was overpowering now, seeping through the cracks in the walls, filling my lungs. It was the smell of my own death. My gaze fell upon the sturdy box in the corner. The Thomas box. With trembling hands, I crawled towards it. My movements were slow, dreamlike. This can't be real. This is a nightmare. I'll wake up. But the rough wood of the box under my fingers was real. The stench of gasoline was real. I fumbled with the latches, my fingers numb and clumsy. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled on top, was a stack of his childhood drawings. A lopsided sun with a smiley face. A stick figure family with a tall man, a woman with a triangle dress, and a small boy holding both their hands. Underneath the drawings was a small, velvet pouch. I opened it. Inside was a tiny lock of his blonde hair from his first haircut. And beneath that, his first pair of shoes, no bigger than my palm, the laces still tied in a clumsy knot. I picked up one of the little shoes. I held it in my hand, this tiny, perfect relic of a time when my love for him was simple and pure, and his love for me was his whole world. This was the boy I knew. This was my Tommy. What had happened to him? Where did he go? I didn't hear the flick of the lighter. I didn't hear the whoosh of the initial flame. My entire world had shrunk to the tiny shoe in my hand. I sat there on the floor of my tomb, clutching the evidence of a love that had once been real, and I waited for the fire. I closed my eyes, and the only image in my mind was of a little boy with blonde hair, running towards me with his arms outstretched, his face full of pure, uncomplicated joy. That was the sun I wanted to remember. The heat came first. A wave of it, pressing against the thin wooden walls of the shed. It wasn't the gentle warmth of a hearth fire. It was a hungry, angry heat. I could hear the crackle, a sound that in any other context might have been comforting, but now it was the sound of my life being consumed. Smoke, acrid and black, began to snake through the cracks in the floorboards and around the doorframe. It caught in my throat, making me cough, a harsh, racking sound in the suffocating silence. I didn't move. I remained on the floor, my back against the wall, clutching that tiny shoe. A strange sort of peace had settled over me. The panic had burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow resignation. My son wanted me gone. He hated me so much that he was willing to erase me with fire. There was nothing left to fight for. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, was already gone. This was just the final, physical act of a death that had begun the day Miranda walked into his life. I thought of Arthur. I hoped he was waiting for me. I hoped he wouldn't be disappointed in how I'd failed to keep our son safe from the darkness in the world, or the darkness within himself. The smoke grew thicker, filling the small space, making my eyes water and sting. It was getting harder to breathe. The wood of the shed began to groan, protesting the intense heat. And then, through the growing roar of the flames, I heard a new sound. Shouting. A man's voice, not Thomas's. Fire. Call 911. Get some water. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a retired fireman who spent most of his days tending his prize-winning tomatoes. I heard the frantic sound of his running footsteps, more shouting. But I felt no relief. It was too late. The shed was an inferno. I don't know how much time passed. Seconds stretched into an eternity in the smoke-filled darkness. The roar of the fire was a physical presence, a deafening beast trying to get in. I closed my eyes, ready for the end. But the end didn't come. Instead, I heard a crash. The sound of an axe splintering wood. Once, twice, 3 times. A section of the wall near me burst inward, and a sliver of gray daylight, thick with smoke, sliced through the gloom. A figure in a heavy coat and a mask appeared in the hole. It was Mr. Henderson. He saw me, a crumpled shape on the floor. Eleanor. My God. He scrambled through the opening he'd made, coughing. He grabbed my arm. Come on. We have to get you out of here. I was dead weight. The will to move had left me. He practically dragged me, pulling me through the jagged hole in the wall, out into the open air. I collapsed onto the wet grass, gulping in the clean, cool air, my lungs burning. The back of the shed was a wall of angry orange flames, climbing towards the sky. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Mr. Henderson helped me to my feet and guided me away from the fire, towards the front of the house. As we rounded the corner, I saw it. Thomas's car was still in the driveway. He hadn't left. He had stayed. To watch. The thought was a fresh wave of agony. He hadn't just lit the match and run. He had stood by, waiting to ensure his terrible work was done. The fire trucks and an ambulance arrived. The paramedics wrapped me in a blanket and sat me on the bumper of the ambulance. They asked me questions I couldn't answer. My mind was a fog. All I could do was stare at my house, my beautiful home, miraculously untouched by the flames that had been meant for me. I was still clutching the little shoe. A paramedic gently tried to take it from me, but my grip was like iron. It was the only thing that felt real. I never told them it was Thomas. I couldn't form the words. I just said it was an accident. Old wiring, maybe. They looked at me with pity, this confused old woman who had almost died. Mr. Henderson knew better. He had seen the gasoline can knocked over in the grass. He gave a statement to the police, his face grim. But without my testimony, what could they do? They took me to the hospital for observation. I spent the night in a sterile white room that smelled of antiseptic. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, the image of the flames replaying in my mind, the sound of that bolt sliding shut, and those two words, "Goodbye, Mom." The next day, my sister Mary arrived, her face a mess of tears and fury. She held me for a long time, and I finally let myself cry. She took me back to her home in Illinois. I left my house in Ohio without a backwards glance. I left behind the garden, the roses, the memories, the ghosts. I left behind the charred, black skeleton of the shed. I didn't hear from Thomas. Not a call. Not a text. Nothing. The police questioned him, I learned later through Mary. He had a story all prepared. He said he'd come over, we'd argued, and he'd left in a huff. He claimed he knew nothing about the fire. Miranda, of course, was his alibi. They were a united front of lies. Weeks turned into a month. I existed in a haze, staying in Mary's guest room, a ghost in someone else's life. I had lost everything. My home, my son, my belief in the fundamental goodness of the world. Mary tried to get me to see a lawyer, to press charges, to fight. But I had no fight left in me. What would be the point? Putting my son in prison wouldn't bring him back. It wouldn't unburn the shed or unsay the words. Then, about 6 weeks after the fire, Mary got a call from Mr. Henderson. He had been keeping an eye on my house. He told her someone had been there. A car matching Thomas's. The person hadn't gone into the house. They had gone straight to the back, to the remains of the shed. Something stirred in me, a flicker of, I don't know what. Curiosity? A need for a final chapter? I asked Mary to drive me back. She argued, but she saw the look in my eyes. The next day, we made the long drive back to Ohio. We didn't go to the house. We parked down the street, and I walked the rest of the way alone, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. From the street, I could see the back of the property. And I saw him. Thomas. He was just standing there, in front of the blackened patch of earth where the shed used to be. He stood there for a long time. Then he knelt down. He seemed to be looking for something in the debris. And that's when I remembered. The Thomas box. In my escape, in the chaos, I had left it behind. It had been at the far wall, the last part to be consumed by the flames. Maybe, just maybe, I saw him stand up, holding something. Even from a distance, I knew what it was. It was the box. Charred, blackened, but somehow its sturdy form had held. He fumbled with the melted latch. He pried it open. He reached inside. And he froze. This was the moment I had read about, the moment I had imagined. This was the moment from the title of my life's tragic final chapter. My son tried to burn me alive. But when he opened the door, except there was no door, there was just a box. He opened the box, and his face went pale. From my vantage point down the street, I couldn't see the details, but I knew what he was seeing. He wasn't seeing ashes. He was seeing the lopsided son, the stick figure family. He was seeing the lock of his own baby hair. He was seeing his first pair of shoes. He was seeing the tangible, undeniable, fire-resistant proof of a love he had tried to incinerate. He sank to his knees, the box in his lap. His shoulders began to shake. I saw him drop his head into his hands, a posture of utter, soul-crushing despair. He wasn't looking at the ashes of a failed murder. He was looking at the ashes of his own soul. He had tried to burn away his mother, but in doing so, he had only succeeded in burning away the last, best part of himself. And in that moment, seeing it all laid out in a charred box, he finally knew it. I turned and walked away. I didn't need to see anymore. I didn't need to hear his apologies or his excuses. His punishment wasn't going to be a prison cell. His punishment was that box. His punishment was the memory of what he had done, a fire that would burn inside him for the rest of his life, a fire he could never extinguish. I had said my goodbye to him that day at the shed. Now he was finally saying goodbye to the man he could have been. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as stone, that it was a far more terrible fate. Leaving my home for the second time felt different. The first time, I was a victim, fleeing in terror and grief. This time, I was a survivor, walking away from a ruin that no longer belonged to me. The house, the garden, the memories, they were part of a life that was over. I had seen the final act of the play, and now it was time to leave the theater. Back at Mary's house in Illinois, a strange calm settled over me. The raging fire of my own grief had dwindled to embers. In its place was a vast, quiet sadness. It was the sadness of a barren tree in winter, not dead, but dormant, waiting for a spring it wasn't sure would ever come. I had my good days and my bad days. On the good days, I would help Mary in her garden, my hands in the soil feeling like a connection to a part of myself I thought I had lost. On the bad days, the smell of burnt toast would send me back to the shed, and I'd have to sit by an open window for an hour, just breathing. About a month after my silent return to Ohio, a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, in care of my sister. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. I recognized it instantly. It was from Thomas. I held the envelope for a long time, its weight feeling immense in my hands. Mary watched me from the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and anger. "You don't have to read it, Eleanor," she said softly. "You could just throw it in the fire." The irony of her words was not lost on me. I thought about it. I could burn his words, just as he had tried to burn me. It was a tempting thought. An eye for an eye. But I was tired of burning. I wanted coolness. I wanted peace. With a deep sigh, I slit the envelope open. The letter was not what I expected. I had braced myself for excuses, for blame shifted onto Miranda, for pleas for a forgiveness he didn't deserve. But it was none of those things. It was just 2 pages of raw, disjointed agony. He wrote about the box. He described pulling it from the rubble, his hands covered in soot. He wrote about seeing his little stick figure drawing, the smiling sun staring up at him. He wrote about holding his baby shoes in his hand and how they seemed so impossibly small. He said he sat there for hours, until it got dark, just holding those things, the proof of my love, a love he had thrown away like trash. He wrote, "I didn't see you in the fire, Mom. I saw myself. I saw everything good I ever was turning to ash. When I locked that door, I thought I was locking you in with the past. But I was the one who was trapped. I've been trapped for years, and I was just too blind and too weak to see it." He wrote about Miranda. He said he had left her. He said the moment he saw that box, her voice in his head, her constant whispers of ambition and resentment and greed, just vanished. All he could hear was the echo of the bolt sliding shut. All he could see was my face, the hopeful smile I'd given him just before I stepped into the shed. The letter ended with 2 simple sentences. "There is no way to fix what I have broken. I just wanted you to know that I remember who you were, even if I forgot who I was. I am so sorry." There was no return address. He wasn't asking for a reply. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just confessing. Not to the police, but to me. My own, personal, heartbreaking confessional. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I didn't cry. The tears were all gone. I was hollowed out, scoured clean by grief. Mary came and put her hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, and my voice was steady. "There's nothing to do." And that was the truth. His sorrow couldn't unstrike the match. His regret couldn't give me back the son I had adored. Love, I have learned, is not a switch that can be turned back on once it's been deliberately, violently turned off. You can't rebuild a house that has been burned to the ground with the same charred timber. You have to find new wood. You have to build something new. And that is what I am trying to do. It has been a year now. I live in a small apartment not far from Mary. It has a little balcony where I grow tomatoes and herbs in pots. They are not as grand as the ones from my Ohio garden, but they are mine. I have joined a book club at the local library. I volunteer at the animal shelter twice a week. The uncomplicated, trusting affection of the dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I am building a new life, a smaller life, a quieter one. It is a life constructed from the wreckage of the old one. Sometimes at night, when the world is still, I think of him. I don't think of the man with the gasoline can and the empty eyes. I try not to. I think of the little boy with the lopsided smile, the one who believed his mother could fix anything, from a scraped knee to a broken heart. I have come to understand that forgiveness is a complicated thing. I don't know if I forgive him. Maybe forgiveness isn't about absolving the other person. Maybe it's about releasing yourself from the prison of their crime. Maybe it's about accepting that some things are so broken they can never be mended, and then finding the strength to walk away from the pieces. I have the Thomas box with me. It sits on a shelf in my closet. It's still charred, and it still smells faintly of smoke. Sometimes I take it down. I open it, and I look at the little shoes. I hold them in my palm. They remind me that the love I felt was real. It was pure and powerful and true. And a love like that doesn't just disappear. It changes. It becomes a part of you, a source of strength, a sad, deep wisdom. My son tried to burn me alive. He tried to turn my body and my memories to ash. But he failed. I am still here. And I have learned the hardest lesson a mother can ever learn. Sometimes, the only way to save your child is to let them go. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to say your own goodbye. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a survivor who refuses to let the fire have the last word. My story is not one of a mother's love conquering all. It is a story of a mother's love enduring all, even its own destruction. And in that endurance, in that quiet survival, I am finally, slowly, finding my peace. There's an old teacup I have now, one I bought at a little antique shop in Illinois. It's fine bone china, paper thin, with a delicate pattern of forget-me-nots. But it has a tiny, hairline crack running from the rim down to the base. You can't see it unless you hold it to the light, and it doesn't leak. Mary, my sister, tells me to throw it out, that it's flawed. But I won't. I drink my morning tea from it every day. It feels appropriate. It's beautiful, it's still useful, but it's been broken. It holds the warmth, but the memory of the fracture is always there. Much like me. A year has passed since the fire. A year since I walked away from the sight of my son on his knees in the ashes of his own making. That image, more than the flames themselves, is what visits me in the quiet hours of the night. It is an image of a damnation more complete than any prison sentence. In the beginning, living with Mary was a shelter from the storm. Her bustling energy, her fierce, protective love, her endless cups of tea and insistence on routine were the scaffolding that held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. I went through the motions of life. The book club, the animal shelter, the small talk with neighbors. I was playing the part of a woman who had moved on. But my heart was still in Ohio, tethered to a ghost-filled house and the ruins of a shed. I never heard from Thomas again after that one, soul-bearing letter. There was a part of me, a foolish, maternal part, that listened for the phone to ring, that checked the mail with a tiny, traitorous leap of the heart. But there was nothing. It was as if he had dropped his confession into the void and then followed it in. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that he had quit his job, sold his apartment in the city, and simply disappeared. Miranda, they said, had married someone else within 6 months, a wealthy developer. She had moved on as if the chapter with Thomas and his troublesome mother had never been written. The quiet in my life was a fragile thing, and it was shattered, as I knew it one day must be, by an official-looking envelope. It wasn't a letter from Thomas. It was from the county tax office in Ohio. A final notice. The property taxes on my house were delinquent. The house, standing empty and silent, was accruing debts. It was in danger of being seized and sold at auction. The notice felt like a summons. The past wasn't finished with me yet. I couldn't let Arthur's house, our house, be taken away like that, sold on the courthouse steps to the highest bidder for a pittance. "Let them take it," Mary said, her face set in a hard line. "It's a cursed place, Eleanor. Let it go." But I couldn't. It felt like a final betrayal of Arthur. He had poured his sweat and his dreams into that soil, into those walls. To let it be lost to bureaucratic neglect felt like letting Thomas's darkness win the final victory. "I have to go back," I told her, my voice quiet but firm. "I have to sell it. On my own terms." The drive back to Ohio was long and silent. Mary drove, her hands tight on the wheel, her disapproval a palpable presence in the car. She thought I was going back to chase a ghost, to open a wound that was just beginning to scar over. But she was wrong. I wasn't going back for him. I was going back for me. I was going back to perform my own exorcism. As we turned onto my old street, my breath caught in my throat. Everything looked the same, the neat lawns, the familiar houses, but it felt alien, like a scene from a life I'd only read about. And then I saw it. My house. The sight of it was a physical blow. The garden I had so lovingly tended was a riot of weeds. The paint on the porch was peeling, and one of the shutters hung at a drunken angle. It looked sad, abandoned, unloved. It was a perfect reflection of how I felt. Mary pulled into the driveway, the crunch of the gravel the same sound I had heard on that terrible day. "I'll come in with you," she said, her voice soft now. "No," I said, placing my hand on her arm. "This is something I have to do alone." I took the old house key from my purse. It felt cold and foreign in my hand. As I walked to the front door, I could see the place where Mr. Henderson's axe had splintered the back of the shed. The town had cleared the debris, but a dark, square patch of scorched earth remained, a scar on the green lawn. Nature was trying to reclaim it. A few stubborn dandelions were already poking through the blackened dirt, but it was a wound that would take years to heal. I put the key in the lock. It resisted at first, stiff from disuse. But with a push, it turned, and the door swung open with a low groan. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me. Not the smell of home, of baking bread or lemon polish. It was the smell of dust, of stale air, of forgotten things. It was the smell of abandonment. I walked slowly through the rooms. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in the air. Everything was just as I had left it. A book lay face down on the arm of my favorite chair. A teacup and saucer sat on the kitchen counter. It was a museum of a life interrupted. I went upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I passed the attic, its door firmly closed now, and went to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, the familiar dip in the mattress a memory in itself. I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no grief. Just a profound emptiness. The house had died. It had died the day Thomas locked me in the shed. I was just visiting its grave. I spent the next hour just being in the space, touching the furniture, running my fingers along the dusty picture frames. I was saying my goodbyes, not just to the house, but to the woman who had lived there. The happy wife, the proud mother. She was gone. I knew I needed to start the process, call a realtor, get the place cleaned up. But I found myself drawn to the back door, to the scar on the lawn. I stepped outside and walked toward it. And that's when I saw it. Tucked just inside the broken frame of the back door, protected from the elements, was a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with a rubber band. My heart began to pound. I knew, without looking, who they were from. I picked them up. There were dozens of them, all addressed to Mom. None of them had been mailed. He must have been coming here, leaving them one by one, a pilgrimage to the site of his crime. I took the stack back inside and sat at the dusty kitchen table. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to read them. I didn't want to let his voice, his pain, into my fragile peace. But I knew I had to. This was the final chapter. I had to read it to the end. I slipped the top letter from the stack. It was dated just a week after he had disappeared. The handwriting was a desperate scrawl. "Mom," it began. "I don't know why I'm writing this. You'll never see it. I come back here sometimes. At night, I park down the street and I just look at the house. I imagine the lights are on. I imagine you're inside, watching your television shows or reading a book. And then I look at the black spot on the lawn, and I remember that the lights are off because of me. The darkness is because of me. I tried to burn away the past. I thought if I could just get rid of the house, of you, of everything that reminded me of what I was supposed to be, then I could be free to be the man Miranda wanted. The successful, unsentimental, forward-looking man. It was a poison she dripped in my ear every day. She'd say you were holding me back, that your love was a cage. And I was so weak, so desperate for her approval, that I believed her. I hammered the bars of the cage myself. But the real cage wasn't your love. It was my own ambition, my own greed. When I opened that charred box and saw my little shoes, it was like my entire life flashed before my eyes. Not the life I had lived, but the one I had thrown away. The person I was supposed to become died in that moment. The boy who loved his mom, who respected his dad. I lit the match and I burned him too. I don't ask for forgiveness. There is no forgiveness for this. I just want to say that the house wasn't the thing of value. The asset wasn't the property. It was you. It was always you. And I cashed it in for nothing. I let the letter fall from my fingers. It wasn't an apology. It was a self-immolation written in ink on paper. It was the sound of a soul screaming in a locked room. I didn't read the others. I couldn't. I understood now. His punishment was complete, and it was total. He hadn't disappeared to escape justice. He had disappeared to serve his own life sentence, in a prison of his own mind, with the ghost of the boy he used to be as his only cellmate. I sat there for a long time as the afternoon sun slanted across the floor. The house was no longer a grave. It was just a house. An empty building full of wood and nails and dusty furniture. The ghosts had been exorcised, not by me, but by the devastating power of his own confession. The tether was cut. I was finally free. I stood up and went to the phone. I didn't call a realtor at first. I called a cleaning service, and then a gardener. I was going to bring it back to life. Not for me, and not for him, but for Arthur. For the house itself. It deserved one last summer of dignity. It deserved to look beautiful before it passed into the hands of someone new, someone who could fill its silent rooms with laughter again. I would sell it, but I would sell it as a home, not as a casualty. The next few weeks were a strange blur of activity. I stayed with Mary, driving over to the house every day. I supervised the cleaners as they scrubbed away the layers of dust and neglect. I worked alongside the gardener, my own hands back in the familiar soil, pulling weeds, pruning the overgrown roses, coaxing life back into the flower beds. With every weed I pulled, it felt like I was pulling a piece of the darkness out of my own heart. The house began to breathe again. I opened all the windows, letting the fresh summer air chase out the stale scent of sorrow. I hired a young, kind-eyed realtor named Susan. She saw the love that had been poured into the home, and she understood what I wanted. "We won't sell it to a developer who will just tear it down, Eleanor," she promised. "We'll find a family." And she did. A young couple with a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with bright eyes and a cloud of dark curls. Their names were Mark and Sarah. When they walked through the door for the first time, the little girl, Lily, ran straight to the sunny spot in the kitchen. "This is my spot, Mommy," she declared. "I will draw pictures here." Sarah looked at me, her eyes welling up. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It feels happy." I gave them a tour. I didn't talk about the market value or the new wiring. I told them stories. "This scratch on the floor," I said, pointing to the mark by the hearth, "is where my son, when he was 4, tried to drag a Christmas tree that was twice his size." I showed them the attic. "My husband was a wonderful woodworker," I said, pointing to the sturdy shelves he had built. "He would spend hours up here, making things for us." I was reclaiming the narrative. The story of this house was not going to be defined by its final, tragic chapter. It was a long book, filled with love and laughter and scraped knees and lullabies, and I would be the one to choose which pages were read aloud. They made an offer that same day. It was a fair offer. I accepted it without hesitation. On the final day, after all the papers were signed and the movers had taken the few things I wanted to keep, I stood in the empty house one last time. It felt clean, light, ready. The stack of Thomas's letters was still on the kitchen table. I had thought about what to do with them. Burn them? Throw them away? Read them all? I decided on none of those things. I picked up the stack and walked upstairs to the attic. I pulled down the ladder and climbed into the warm, dusty space. I walked over to the shelves Arthur had built, and I placed the stack of letters in the far corner, behind a loose board I knew was there. I pushed the board back into place. They didn't belong to me anymore. They belonged to the house. They were a part of its story, a dark, secret chapter, but one that was now sealed away. They were the confession and the penance, and this house was his confessional. I was leaving the burden here, in the past, where it belonged. I walked out of the house for the last time and didn't look back. Mary was waiting in the car. She didn't say anything. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the house, bright and welcoming, with a sold sign proudly displayed on its newly mowed lawn. I watched it get smaller and smaller until it was just a tiny shape in the distance, and then it was gone. I don't know what the future holds. My new life is a blank page. But for the first time, that prospect doesn't scare me. It feels like a gift. My name is Eleanor. I am 68 years old. I am a sister. I am a gardener. I am a survivor. I am a woman with a cracked teacup who has learned that you don't have to be whole to be strong. You just have to be willing to pour the warmth back in, one morning at a time. And as the road stretched out before me, leading me away from the ashes and towards the quiet promise of a new dawn, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was going to be all right. The drive away from Ohio was not a retreat. It was an advance, a strategic movement into an unknown future. As Mary drove, the rolling hills and familiar woods of my home state gradually flattened into the vast, open plains of Illinois. The landscape itself felt like a metaphor. I was leaving the complex, shadowed valleys of my past for something simpler, something starker, a horizon so wide it was impossible to see the end. I wasn't running from a monster anymore. I was simply walking toward a blank canvas, with no idea what picture I was meant to paint. I didn't talk much on that drive. I just watched the world go by, feeling the last threads of my old life snapping one by one. The final thread was the heaviest. It wasn't the house, or the garden, or the ghost of my husband. It was the image of my son kneeling in the dirt, his body convulsing with the grief he had earned. In selling the house and sealing his letters in the wall, I had closed the book. I had left him to his haunting. And in doing so, I had finally, truly, let him go. It was not an act of cruelty, but one of necessity. You cannot carry a ghost on your back forever. Eventually, its weight will crush you. The years that followed were quiet. Not the loud, ringing quiet of loneliness, but a softer, more settled silence. My little apartment became my sanctuary. The balcony garden thrived. I learned the names of all the dogs at the shelter, their tragic backstories, and their resilient, trusting hearts. My circle of friends from the book club became my new family. We were a collection of widows, divorcees, and women who had, in one way or another, found ourselves starting over in the autumn of our lives. We didn't dwell on our sorrows, but we acknowledged them. They were like the cracks in my teacup, a part of our history, a testament to the fact that we had been used, loved, and had survived the breaking. I started a community garden in a small, neglected park a few blocks from my apartment. I got permission from the city, and soon my little project attracted others. Mr. Gable, a retired postal worker with a bad back, taught me how to properly stake tomato plants. Mrs. Chin, who spoke little English, communicated through the universal language of plants, showing me how to grow the most magnificent bok choy I had ever seen. We were a motley crew, turning a patch of forgotten earth into something vibrant and full of life. In the shared work, in the feel of the soil, in the simple joy of watching a seed sprout, I found a purpose that was untethered to my past. I was no longer just Arthur's wife or Thomas's mother. I was Eleanor, the woman who could coax miracles from the dirt. Of course, the ghost never leaves completely. It just learns to walk more softly. There were days a sudden scent, a bonfire in the distance, The smell of gasoline at a filling station would send a cold shock through me. A news report about a family dispute would make my hands tremble. On those days, I would go to the animal shelter and sit in the puppy enclosure, letting their clumsy, boundless affection wash over me until the chill receded. I never spoke of the fire to my new friends. It was a story too heavy to share, a burden that was mine alone to carry. I had built a new life around the wound, a strong, thick wall of normalcy and routine. 5 years after I left Ohio, the past came calling. It was a Tuesday morning. I was on my balcony, watering my geraniums, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, with an Ohio area code. For a single, dizzying second, I thought it was him. My hand hesitated over the screen. "Hello," I answered, my voice barely a whisper. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" A professional, dispassionate voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Vance, my name is Daniel Shapiro. I'm an attorney in Columbus, Ohio. I'm calling you regarding the estate of your son, Thomas Vance." The watering can slipped from my hand, clattering onto the balcony and spilling water over my feet. The estate. The word implied a finality that stole the air from my lungs. I don't understand, I stammered. "I'm very sorry to be the one to inform you, Mrs. Vance. Your son passed away 2 weeks ago." I sank into my balcony chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "Passed away." The words were so clinical, so sterile. They didn't seem to fit the violent, passionate, broken boy I remembered. "How?" The question was a croak. "It was a construction accident, ma'am. He was working on a small site upstate. It was very quick, I'm told. He didn't suffer. A construction accident. He had been working with his hands. Not in a clean, quiet accounting firm, but out in the world, building things." The image was so incongruous, so strange. "I see," I said, though I saw nothing at all. "Mrs. Vance," the lawyer continued, his voice softening slightly, "I'm the executor of his will. He named you as the sole beneficiary." This was the blow that finally broke through the shock. Beneficiary. After everything. After the cruelty, the greed, the fire, he had left everything to me. A bitter, hysterical laugh tried to escape my throat. What was there to leave? A mountain of debt? A legacy of shame? "There must be a mistake," I said. "No mistake, ma'am. It's not a large estate, by any means." But he was very specific in his instructions. "There are some assets and a personal item he wished for you to have. Would it be possible for you to come to my office to settle the affairs?" I felt Mary's presence before I saw her. She had heard the crash of the watering can and had come to the balcony door. Her face was a mask of alarm. I looked at her, my eyes pleading for an anchor in this sudden, churning sea. I nodded into the phone. "Yes, I'll come." The second drive to Ohio was heavier than the first. This time, I was going not to bury a house, but to bury the last vestiges of a hope I didn't even know I was still holding. The hope that one day, somehow, things could be mended. His death was the final, irrevocable proof that they could not. Mr. Shapiro's office was in a tall, glass building that scraped the Columbus sky. He was a kind-faced man in his late 50s, with weary eyes that told me he had delivered bad news many times before. He sat me down and laid a thin folder on the polished mahogany desk between us. "Your son lived a very quiet life these past few years, Mrs. Vance," he said gently. "He moved to a small town in the north of the state, rented a room, worked for a local carpentry business, kept to himself, from what I can gather. Carpentry. Like Arthur." The detail was a small, sharp pain in my chest. He had been trying to find his way back to his father. "He didn't have much," Mr. Shapiro continued, opening the folder. "A small savings account. The total is just over $30,000. He pushed a document toward me. As per his will, he has left the entire sum to the Burn Care and Rehabilitation Center at Ohio State University Hospital, in your name." I stared at the paper, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. It wasn't for me. He wasn't trying to buy my forgiveness. He was trying to atone. He was taking the pittance he had earned with his own 2 hands and using it to heal the very type of wound he had tried to inflict upon me. It was the most profound apology he could possibly have made. "There is one other thing," Mr. Shapiro said, reaching into a drawer. He pulled out a small object wrapped in brown paper and twine. He was very clear that this was to be given to you directly. He pushed the small package across the desk. My fingers trembled as I untied the twine and unfolded the paper. Inside, nestled in my palm, was a small, exquisitely carved wooden rocking horse. It was no bigger than my hand, carved from a single piece of light-colored wood, sanded so smooth it felt like silk. It was not a copy of the one Arthur had made. This one was simpler, more humble. Its head was bowed slightly, as if in sorrow or reverence. I held the little horse in my hand, its perfect, heartbreaking form a testament to countless hours of patient work. This is what he had been doing with his lonely nights. He had been recarving a memory he had shattered. He had been trying to build a bridge back to a time of innocence, a bridge he knew he could never cross. I looked up at the lawyer, my vision clear now. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. I walked out of that office and into the bright Ohio sunlight. The grief I felt was not for the man who died in a construction accident. It was for the little boy who had gotten lost so long ago and had never found his way home. This little horse was his final letter, his last goodbye. It's evening now. I am sitting on my balcony in Illinois. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet. My community garden below is lush and green, a testament to shared work and patient hope. The little wooden rocking horse sits on the table beside my teacup with a fine, hairline crack. I no longer see my life as a story that was ruined. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But life isn't like that. It's a series of stories, layered one on top of the other. The story of the happy young wife, the story of the proud mother, the story of the betrayed and broken woman, and now this story. The story of a quiet woman who grows flowers on a balcony and finds peace in the company of stray animals and good-hearted neighbors. My son tried to burn my story to the ground. He failed. He only managed to end his own. In his place, a new story grew, my story. It grew slowly, painfully, pushing its way through the ashes and scorched earth, reaching for the sun. It's not a perfect story. It has scars. It has ghosts. It has a tiny, beautifully carved rocking horse that I will keep forever. It reminds me of the terrible, beautiful complexity of love, how it can build a home and how it can burn one down. And it reminds me that even after the most devastating fire, if you are patient and if you are strong, something new and quiet and brave can learn to grow in the ruins. And for a life that has seen the flames, that is more than enough. It is everything.